new Symposia series. We started these Symposia series in the last spring term, and we are now continuing with one about using rubrics effectively. So for those of you who came to this workshop, thank you so much for coming. We are the institutional effectiveness team. A lot of us have already worked with you. Good evening. I mean, good afternoon. Hold on. Okay, thank you, Susie. Susie's controlling the PowerPoint today. So what we do in our office is—
Sorry, I'm troubleshooting right now for somebody who's trying to join.
Oh, no problem.
I'm going to hit record. So give me a second.
I already did that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So what we do in the institution is we provide assessment support and help for all faculty and staff who do assessment for their programs, their courses, their certificates, and their administrative areas. And we help promote the use of assessment for data-informed continuous improvement practices. And so we comply with outside stakeholders, as well as promote student success at FIU and make sure that our programs and our courses are aiming at improving and providing learning experiences that will be beneficial for our students. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Catherine Perez. I'm the Senior Director of Institutional Effectiveness, and my team is here as well.
Hi, I'm Susie. Hi, I'm Susie Lieben. I'm the Manager of Institutional Effectiveness.
Hi, I am Eileen Sanabria. I am the Associate Director for Institutional Effectiveness. Leo, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Leo Ruiz. I'm one of the coordinators here in the Institutional Effectiveness Office.
Zen.
Hey, everyone. My name is Zen. I'm the other coordinator of the Institutional Effectiveness Office. Nice to meet you all.
Jillian.
She's trying to join. I was trying to troubleshoot her.
Yeah, okay.
She's having trouble. So I was trying to work with her to troubleshoot.
Okay. And then we have William.
Hi, my name is William. I'm one of the graduate. Graduate assistants here.
Okay, thank you, William. So today we're going to cover, next slide, Susie. So we're going to talk about what is a rubric and defining that and the different types of rubrics that there are. We're going to cover two types of rubrics specifically in this session. We are going to then address rubric development strategies and then how to analyze data that comes from the rubric. We are here to support faculty with any types of rubrics or rubric development questions or creation that they need. So that's one of the things that we help faculty with. This presentation is an introduction to this, but we can go a lot more in depth and actually help create rubrics with you all, or give you the rubrics that are already developed so that you can, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You could already use some instruments that are out there. Next.
Sorry, I'm still trying to troubleshoot.
Leave that alone and let's go. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we have so just a few housekeeping rules for the Zoom room. So we're going to use poll everywhere. So if you go to open a browser and go to pollev.com and enter the meeting ID assess FIU 491, you'll be able to respond to our polls during the meeting. You could also text assess FIU 491 to 37607. So I'm going to open up the first poll, and that is going to be, what is your experience using rubrics? And I'm going to activate it in a couple seconds, and then you'll be able to respond. So I just want to give everybody a couple seconds while they log in and get onto that website to be able to connect. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up on the screen now. which is going to be here. So all your responses will populate here. And this is how we'll be using it. So you can tell us a little bit about your experience using rubrics. Do you currently use them? How do you use them? And just type, or you can chime in over voice. You can unmute and speak if you're comfortable. Okay, so we see some responses coming in. So only when I used it in public school, most classes for large projects and presentations, when you're interviewing candidates for positions, that's a good use of them. All of these are good uses of them. Never use them in my current role. Interesting to see how they can be applied. Okay. To build learning outcomes, use rubrics to build learning outcomes and learning goals during grad school when interviewing candidates for positions, limited use. Okay. So we have varying levels of experience here in the room. That's great. So this will hopefully be a nice introduction to rubrics for some of you and a refresher of some information for others. Every day I'm evaluating grad students at Defense is awesome. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll now. And of course, you can use the chat while I'm talking, and we'll go ahead and get your questions from the chat while we're presenting, and I'm going to move on. So I'll close this poll for now, and we'll open it back up at a later time in the session. Okay, so getting started. So what are rubrics? Well, in essence, rubrics help define expected performance standards and standards of quality and levels of accomplishment when you're evaluating student work or performance or task performance, anything like that. Like someone said in the poll over there, they use it when interviewing candidates. It can be applied in many number of ways. So they're multi-dimensional tools that set scoring guidelines, and they provide consistency in evaluating student work or task performance. Multitude of things, and they delineate scoring criteria by competencies so that multiple graders, if they're using the same rubric, they arrive at a similar score. And rubrics provide both teachers or evaluators and students with valuable data about the degree of which a specific learning outcome or task performance outcome is being achieved. So the main purpose of a rubric is its ability to assess student process performance or a piece of work that's being evaluated, and rubrics can be tailored to each assignment or task or the course to better understand what's the learning objective or any other objective that you're trying to measure. So some benefits of rubrics for both faculty and students are that rubrics make assessing work quick and efficient. They help graders justify the scores that they're assigning to students or others. Rubrics are also teaching tools, and they support student learning and development of critical thinking skills and are helpful in conducting diagnostic assessments and also providing feedback to students. On the student side, rubrics are beneficial because they provide a clear understanding of what's expected of them. And the students then once the students have a rubric before they start the task or the assignment, the students will have a concrete criteria of that they can, that's available to them, so that shows what makes a good capstone project, for example, or what makes a good research paper, or what makes a good assignment. What are my expectations for this piece of work that I'm setting out to do? And when they know that criteria, it helps them be better at self-assessing. They can peer assess, and it gives them, like I said, that clear criteria of what's expected of them when they're completing a task or an assignment. There's a vast body of research that supports the notion that rubrics improve student work and the students' work quality, and they also increase overall learning. So rubrics can also improve student learning by allowing that that extra support of setting that clear expectation so the student knows what they're doing when they go into the assignment to complete the task.
So using rubrics as an assessment tool, the first thing you need to do when you're using a rubric is you need to identify what it is that you're trying to measure. What is it that you're looking for? What is it that students should show? What is it that students should show you that they're mastering? What competencies should they master? And there's where you list the competencies, the skills, the abilities, the behaviors that you want students to master. After you do that, then you think about what experiences, what activities, what artifacts do students complete either within a specific course or within the range of courses, if you're talking about a whole program, that could show you where you can actually assess whether students have mastered those competencies or not. So first you find out what it is that students need to show you. How can I get there based on what students already do, or maybe you have to tweak some of the assignments or the experiences for the students so that they can, so that you give them the opportunity to demonstrate the learning. After that, then you define the criteria on which you wish to evaluate the student. So what are the levels of mastery? Are you going to use a 1 through 5 scale, 1 through 3 scale, 1 through 4 scale? What different levels are there based on what it is you are assessing? And this is where you create a performance scale that classifies the different levels at which students would progress through the mastery of or the attainment of those specific competencies. And then afterwards, so you identify what they need to learn, how it is that you're going to assess it. You have a defined criteria of how it is that they're going to, on how it is that you're going to evaluate them. And then you need to talk about how it is, you need to think about when and where you're going to use the rubric, in which course, who's going to be responsible for it. This is also where inter-rater reliability comes into place, making sure that everyone that is using the rubric, that there's a consensus about how the rubric is used to score student artifacts. For inter-rater reliability, you should get together with everyone that's going to, every faculty member that's going to use this rubric. You should score artifacts, at least 3, 4, 5 artifacts, either together as a team or individually, and then come together and discuss how it is that every faculty member scored the students on different competencies. Sometimes what happens with inter-rater reliability is that what might be to me a 4 could be to someone else a 5, or could be to another faculty member a 3. And it could just very well be that the verbiage on the rubric needs to change on what a 3 entails or on what a 5 entails. So making sure that you fine-tune the rubric by working with everyone that will be using the rubric as to what it is that students should exhibit in terms of mastering the competencies and the learning should definitely be part of setting the standards on how to use a rubric. So see if you can go on to the next slide. Okay. Part of making sure, here's an example of why it is important that how you describe what students should, what each level of mastery looks like. Is important is, for example, it takes it from subjective to a little bit more objective. Overall, rubrics are a somewhat subjective tool, but those descriptors that you put for your performance scale are what make it a little bit more of an objective tool. The example that you see here, so a subjective feedback would be, I need to see a clear conclusion. Well, if you just tell students they need to see a clear conclusion, either when you're explaining to them the assignment or when you're giving them feedback after they've submitted the assignment, they might not know exactly what you mean by what a clear conclusion is. So on your rubric, you would describe what a clear conclusion is. If on the scale, or a 5 or a 3, that entails a clear conclusion. So the conclusion is a thoughtful summary of the argument. So here, the student reads this as they're preparing to submit the artifact. They know that their conclusion needs to have a summary of their argument. So the student can think excuse me, can think back as to what is my argument, what argument, if this is a research paper or some other type of paper, what is my argument? I'm going to summarize it as part of my conclusion, because this is what the faculty are looking for, so that I can score a 5 or a 3, whatever the maximum number of points is. So just having that that descriptor there, as opposed to just telling them, I got to see a clear conclusion, helps the students refine their work and know what your expectations are. Moving forward. All right. So there's several types of rubrics. The two that are most commonly used are holistic and analytic rubrics. Holistic rubrics are holistic in nature. They provide a broad score, a score on overall performance across several different competencies, and you can really break down which specific competencies students are deficient on, or students are strong on when you're using a holistic rubric. It's more of an overall, and we'll give you an example after this. It's more of an overall score on the assignment or on the experience that you are assessing. Now, when we're looking at an analytic group, so the holistic rubric does look at competencies. They do have competencies embedded in them, but there's no disaggregation of how students perform within the competencies when you give them the score. So when you're looking, when you're trying to disaggregate and seeing which competencies you need to target, when you use a holistic rubric, you really don't know based on your data. Now, to do that, you need to use an analytic rubric. An analytic rubric could have exactly the same competencies that a holistic rubric has. It's just broken down into each competency will have its own separate score. And even though you're grading the same assignment, the same competencies, now you have that disaggregation of data by giving each competency its individual score. And that disaggregation of data is what helps you really see what the areas of growth are and what the areas of strengths are for the students, and drive improvement based on those, based on that data. Our team, well, institutional effectiveness as a whole and an assessment as a whole, the whole point of assessment is to drive improvement. How do you drive improvement? You have to back up your improvement efforts with data, right? You want data-driven improvements. The way to drive improvement with data for when it comes to student learning is by using analytic rubrics, because you can fine-tune into specific competencies where students are struggling with to really drive your improvements. And now we have examples of a holistic rubric. So this is, let's say we are assessing a writing sample, students' writing sample. If you look at, this is a 4-point rubric, holistic rubric. If you look at, let's look at the left-hand side for a 4, provides ample supporting details. Organizational pattern is logical. So there we're looking at competencies, details, organization, using effective language, and then following the rules of standard English. So there are 4 competencies within this rubric that are being assessed. Now, to get a 4, when students get a 4, when students get a 3, there might be some variance into maybe one of them is a 3, but maybe one of them is a 4. So, for example, they could have really a 3. You could be giving them a 3, but really generally follows the rules of standard English. Their grammar is on point. Grammar should really be a 4. But that's not evident when you give the students a 3. Now, if we were to disaggregate it, and each of those bullet points, each of those competencies would have its own score, the students would score a 3 across the first 3 competencies and a 4 on the last one. And that one would show, okay, maybe we don't need to focus on grammar, we need to focus on the other 3. Now go to the example of the analytic one. Now, looking at an example of an analytic rubric, 4-point scale, same thing. This one goes from high proficiency to limited proficiency to high proficiency. And here they're assessing 5 different competencies: originality, clarity, organization, support, and use of sources and documentation. Each one of them gets their own score. You're still assessing writing now, but each one of them gets their own score. And when you look at your data, when you're able to see what the averages are, what percentage of students met each of how the students scored on each of these competencies, you can fine tune where it is that your improvements should go, and even areas that you really don't need to continue to tackle within your course, because students are doing fine, and the way that you cover it, the content that you have is already sufficient for students, and you really don't need to do anything else with that. Now, this using the analytic rubric also helps you as a rater and as a faculty member, fine-tune where you're scoring and the way you think about an artifact when you're reading it. When you're reading a writing sample, these are not the only 5 competencies that students can exhibit in a writing piece. There's 5 million other writing skills that students can show. But when you define this and when you define which competencies are part of your rubric, you're telling students, and you as a faculty member are really looking are defining which competencies are important for students to master within the whole realm of writing, which is huge. You're defining what are the most important ones that students should master and exhibit through the specific artifact or experience. Through the descriptors, the performance scale descriptors, you're also, like I was saying earlier, with the clear conclusion example, you are fine-tuning and you are giving students a tool that they can use to see what it is that you're looking for, so that they can get the highest score possible. These rubrics should also be something that you use with the students and that you discuss with the students while you are discussing the artifact. While you are explaining the assignment, you should talk to the students about what a 5 or a high proficiency looks like. You should provide them examples or what a limited proficiency looks like. You should go over the verbiage on all of these descriptors to make sure that students understand what you mean, because remember, we write these as discipline experts, but the students are not discipline experts, so they might not know what it is that you mean by if you look at support reasoning for high proficiency, what you mean by substantial concrete development of ideas. So giving them examples of that verbiage that you're using on the rubric will set the students up for hopefully for success and better understanding what it is that you mean. Any questions on this? So it's not that holistic rubrics are bad. They're not. They're good. And you can use them to get a sense of they're almost good. They're good to get a sense and a feel for how students are doing on a broader scale. But if you really want to fine-tune skills, then you really should be using analytic rubrics. And we can help you develop rubrics. You don't have to do this on your own, which is the scary part for some people. All right, so how do you develop a rubric? The first thing you have to do is you have to think about the assignment. What task am I developing a rubric for? And what are some of the characteristics of that assignment? What am I asking students to do with that assignment? Then the next thing you have to do is actually write down the description of the assignment. What are the instructions? What exactly am I asking students to do? So first you think of it broadly, then you put it down into concrete details and steps on what it is you're asking students to do. Once you have that, then you define the competencies based on what you're asking students to do. Do you define the competencies, the skills that students should exhibit once they complete that task based on the instructions that you're giving them? And then after you do that, you have your competencies, you have the description of the task, then you define, go Kathy, you have.
So I wanted to say that this since we saw the example of using the rubrics for interviews, that this does not only apply to a learning experience. We talk about defining assignments and tasks, but this is also looking at the goals of whatever it is that you're evaluating or assessing using that rubric tool. And if it is for something that is not about learning necessarily, these tasks or performances or whatever it is that you're evaluating or assessing, you also have a set of definitions for what is ideal. And that's why, you know, and as Aileen was going through this, I was remembering that, and I think that while we use the language of competencies a lot in this, it's translatable to any kind of task or any kind of assessment of a performance or anything else that might not necessarily be traditional learning assignments. This can easily translate into different types of experiences that you might use rubrics for. Sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
That's okay. That was the teacher in me talking. But yeah, like Kathy was saying, you can apply it. It's basically what criteria am I evaluating, regardless of what the context is. What criteria am I evaluating, and how am I going to evaluate it? That goes into if you're an administrative unit and you are you're evaluating a particular an event that you're having, a workshop that you're having, anything, just criteria and how am I evaluating. You can develop a rubric for that. But the teacher in me always comes out. So I will take out I will put in my students in there somehow, some way. So after you define the task, the competencies, the criteria that you're assessing through that task, then you have to define and describe your performance scale indicators, which is what does mastery look like? What does a fair look like? What does a 2 look like versus a 5 look like? And the description, again, is very, very important so that students are aware of what and understand what it is you're looking for, and so that your feedback can be tied to those descriptors on the rubric and is a little bit more objective. Any questions so far before I move on? I am not monitoring the chat, so does anyone have a question in the chat? No? Okay. All right. So how do you design a rubric? Basically, we have the criterion or the competency. We put them on the left-hand side. This is the most used model of a rubric. I've seen it flipped as well, but usually this is the most used one. You define the criteria, you put it there, those are your competencies. Then you define your performance scale, which is a 1 through 4, a 1 through 5, a 1 through 3. Sometimes they don't use a 1, sometimes you use a 0 to 3. It's really up to you. You don't have to use a number either. It can be just the words, the descriptors for it. And then you have the performance, and that's your performance scale. And then you have your performance scale descriptors, which is that verbiage, that language that makes it discipline specific and specific as to what the criteria or the competency looks like for the specific level of mastery that you have on your rubric. Questions, Susie? Okay, so here's an example of one. Your step 3, so your competencies, your criteria are on the left-hand side, and then your step 4, which is your performance scale, and then your performance descriptors are on the at the top, and then within each box, matching the scale level with the competency. Susie. Okay, so setting a scale for the rubric, like I said before, it could be a numerical scale, 1 through 5, 1 through 3, or it could be descriptive labels. If you don't have to you're not married to any one of the two. Now, usually when you're using descriptive labels, if you're translating it onto percentages or anything or something numerical, then usually a number is assigned to them. And typically a rating scale consists of an even number of performance levels, so 1 through 4. That's what we recommend, even though 1 through 3 is very, very common, because what happens when you use an odd number is that 2, if you're using a 1 through 3, that 2 is the catch-all. There's not a wider range of performance for the students. It's either really bad, really good, or in the middle, and then most students just fall within the middle. So 1 through 4 will show a little bit more variance of student performance and where they're at in terms of the competency. So we really do recommend 1 through 4 questions. And the chart on the bottom shows you some ideas of the verbiage that you can use when you're developing a rubric when you're using a 1 through 4 scale. So like exceeds expectations to developing or superior to needs assessment. This one goes from high to low. You can also flip your rubric and have it from low to high. There's no rule for that. It's really up to you and how it works best for you. So some other tips for rubric building: make sure that you provide a description of what each level of attainment means. We cannot stress this enough. This is almost like your contract with the students on what it is that you expect them to show, how it is that you expect them to perform. And it's very helpful as an instructor or when you're reviewing this with other people. Even during an interview, when you have to give feedback, sometimes you don't hire someone and they ask you for feedback on why it is that they did not get selected for the position. You can use that rubric to show, well, these were our expectations, and this is where you excelled, and this is where we had some concerns, and this is why we didn't select you for the position. Using a single numerical score for each performance level. So instead of one level being 1 to 2, and then 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, just use one number, one numerical score for each performance level, no ranges. And again, preferably a 4-point scale and even number of levels instead of an odd number, so that there's not your catch-all area. Avoid undefined half points. So don't, if it goes a 1 and a 2, don't give 1.5, don't give 1.75, because how do you define, if you don't have it on the rubric visually, how do you define a 1.75 or a 3.75 for students? Why didn't you give them a 2, or why didn't you give them a 3? So make sure that you stick to the point levels that you give them, so that there's no gray area. Again, you're trying to use the rubrics to grade something that is subjective, which are open-ended artifacts, and your rubrics are your tool to make your grading and your expectations as objective as possible. When you use half points that are not described anywhere, that's where you almost fall between the cracks, and it lends to arguments, and the students get confused too, because they don't know what it is you mean by a half a point. And then limit the checklist requirements. Like none of your rubric criteria they need to have at least 20 quotes or 20 sources, because you don't want someone using a rubric. Someone using a rubric is reading a whole entire assignment, and then they're looking for the competencies. You don't want to get to, now they need to count 20 things. Now they need to count 30 things. You're looking for a more holistic analysis and a more holistic interpretation of how the students met that competency, as opposed to trying to just count something. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So the value rubrics are a set of rubrics that we really recommend in IE. They were developed by AAC and U using faculty experts nationwide. There's 16 value rubrics, and they're super used by over 5,000 organizations across the globe. And they are general, rubrics, but they're grounded on 4 different principles of which they call essential learning outcomes: knowledge of human cultures, intellectual and practical skills, personal and social responsibility, and integrative and applied learning. These are broad categories that can be applied to specific disciplines. And again, the rubrics are, they're general, but you can use them, and that's what we always recommend to faculty. You can use them as a source to develop your own rubrics and make it discipline, and make them discipline specific. So customizing these rubrics as opposed to reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch, customizing these rubrics, using some of the verbiage from the value rubrics to create your own critical thinking rubric, or to create your own oral communication rubric. They have for critical thinking, for oral communication, for written. They have, I think, for ethical, for ethics. There's 16 of them, and we will share with you, once we share the slides, we will share the rubrics with you as well, and their website. But anything that you want for your discipline, you could probably use critical thinking within any discipline. You could use one of the value rubrics to ground, as a framework to structure your own rubric for your discipline. So this is something that we highly recommend if you're not familiar with them. Here's an example of the critical thinking value rubric. It assesses 5 different competencies: explanation of issues, evidence, context and assumptions, the student perspectives, and then conclusions and related outcomes. When you use these as a source, you don't have to use every single criteria that they have, and you don't have to use any of the competencies that they have, but this gives you an idea of what it is that you should be looking for. What are some of the areas that you can think about, some of the competencies that you can think about when assessing a critical thinking within your discipline. The verbiage within the descriptors is something that the faculty use a lot. They tweak it for their own discipline, for their own disciplines, but they use it a lot to sort of shape what it is they want students to show at each of the levels. Any questions? No? Okay. All right, Susie.
Okay, so we're gonna reopen the poll everywhere for just a little activity. So we're gonna show you an example of a rubric, and you're gonna tell us whether that's analytic or holistic. So you're gonna use poll everywhere. Again, this is gonna be multiple choice. So I'm gonna pull up the rubric on the screen, and then you're going to answer our text, or put in the, when I activate the poll, it's going to be A for analytic or B for holistic. So I'm going to activate the poll now, and I'm going to show you the rubric. So is this an example of an analytic or holistic rubric? And then once everybody puts some responses in, I'll show the results. Yeah, I'll put the poll result up here, small. Okay. So we have some responses coming in. Does anybody else want to throw in their response? Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. So we're going to go on. We've got 43% of you said analytic and 57% said holistic. So let's look at this rubric. This rubric here is an analytic rubric. So this is analytic because it has the criteria here. We're looking at oral communication, where we have the separation of the competencies on the left-hand side, the first column. Up at the top, we have the breakdown of the performance scale. And then we have the clear performance scale descriptions inside the rubric. So this one is an example of an analytic rubric. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to go to the next one and I'll activate that poll. The same thing, A for analytic, B for holistic. And it's collecting responses now. Okay, and we've got responses coming in. With 63% saying holistic and 38% saying analytic. And this rubric is an example of a holistic rubric. This is holistic because multiple competencies are getting scored at the same time. Even though the look and feel of it, we have the performance levels here on the side. Each of the descriptions has multiple competencies inside and are getting scored at the same time. So that's why this one is a holistic rubric. Are there any questions? And then the next one is going to be, okay, so let's discuss this. What was the muddiest point up to this point in the conversation? Is there anything that's unclear or you would like more information on before we move into the next section, which is going to be the data analysis section? I'm going to go ahead and activate the poll, and it's going to be the same thing, text and or respond in your browser, and then you can put those up here, and then we'll address some of those questions here on the screen.
While we get we get responses on the muddiest point or whatever area is least clear in the presentation. And by the way, this is feedback that you can ask students as well when you're teaching. The muddiest point actually has some research behind it. When you're teaching, you could ask muddiest point, and then once you get a quick assessment of where students might be confused and you address those on the spot, that actually leads to greater retention and greater learning for the end of the course. So that's one of the teaching strategies that we try to implement when we teach ourselves. So
yes, the example of the analytic rubric had 3 evaluation levels. That's the most commonly used, and it's not that it's wrong. You can use it. It's just when you're using it and when different faculty are using it, you just have to be very, very mindful that that level 2 does not just catch everyone. That's not horrible, but that's not great. That you really are aware of what rating you're giving the students, so that 2 doesn't become that almost everyone in the class has a 2, and then 1 or 2 has a 1, and then 1 or 2 have a 3. So it's not that a 3-point scale is wrong. It's just that scorers need to be mindful that the 2 is not the catch-all of everyone that's all right, just goes, and not excelling just goes in there. That's why the 4, so that the level 2 and the level 3 have a little bit more of a distinction. That's why the 4-point scale is what's recommended. But yes, the 3-point scale is what most rubrics have, because it's almost the easiest one for to develop.
yeah, and to add to that, Eileen, I would say that for a 3-point scale, it's more important that those descriptors are very detailed. With 3-point scale, you are more likely if you don't have clear descriptors to categorize everyone as a 2, and but if you have clear descriptors, you'll be more likely to understand, okay, Maybe there's some students that belong in the 3 category. Maybe there's some that belong in the 1 category. When you have more scale items, you are able to provide greater nuances between performances. And this is part of the reason why we have analytical rubrics to begin with, right? Because you can divide the competencies into different subsections or learning outcomes into different subsections and be able to evaluate them separately. However, when you have less performance scales, like a lot of people even use a 2-point scale in which it's 0 or 1. And in the 0 or 1 category, it doesn't really tell you much information about the nuances between the performance of different students at different levels of mastery. Beyond that, we didn't really cover this much or at all during this presentation. We highly recommend that if multiple people are going to be using this assessment tool, or if this rubric is going to be used across different semesters by different people, or maybe you're in a group of people who are in a panel evaluating someone or a student. We always recommend having a session or a meeting beforehand to be able to develop inter-rater reliability. What does that mean? It means have common definitions of how you're interpreting and rating using the rubric, similar performance or tasks. So you can get an example or a writing example or performance example and have all the raters rate it, and then use that example as a way to discuss why someone would choose to rate someone as a 2 as opposed to a 3. Or, what it is that they believe the rubric should include that might not have been adequately described in the rubric. And this is also part of the rubric kind of the tool correction process as well, because as you talk to other people about rubrics and about the same assignment or scale, you might see that some areas are muddy or murky that we might not understand the same as someone else who's looking at this. Having someone else look at rubrics also is helpful for students, because sometimes when we know our syllabi and we know our assignments so well, we develop a rubric to assess those assignments. Coming from an expert perspective, like Aline was kind of hinting at before, it is hard for students to have the same perspective or have the same understanding of what the rubrics mean. So that's a very long explanation about the point scales, but it kind of goes along with how well these need to be defined, no matter how many points the performance scale is. Was there another muddy point, or did I just imagine that popping up?
It just said even number.
Oh, okay. The even number, meaning 1 through 4 scale or 1 through 6 scale. Rather than even or odd numbers, I sometimes think that just having more than 3 indicators might be helpful, but still less than, like, I would say 5. Between 4 and 5 would be my recommendation of the number of scale points to have for the performance scale. And the reason why is because it's easier to define the subtleties between students and the levels of mastery that they may demonstrate. 3-point scales are easier to grade, so they're easier for performances that might not have a lot of nuances to them. So if it is a short kind of, if it's a minute paper or a short paragraph or something that needs to be assessed, it doesn't require much effort. It's faster to grade and kind of easier to grade. if you just use a 3-point scale, for example, and that might be just enough information for the students to be able to improve upon that one small performance. And that might translate into a bigger assignment or project that might have more nuances and more kinds of differences between demonstration of mastery that might be captured in a larger scale, like a 1 through 4 scale. Did I clear that up? I'm not sure if that helped.
Here's another question that came in. Should students see our program evaluation rubric you're using for SACs and evaluating their capstone products with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always recommend transparency for students. Actually, some of the Board of Governors require us to state the learning outcomes that are being used by each of the undergraduate programs in a public website. So right now they're being shown, but they're being exposed in a public website, which is our website. However, do any students know what assessment.fiu.edu mean? No. So even though we comply by having these assessment report, like only the outcomes and the methods for assessment for undergraduate programs and the curriculum maps are submitted annually by the programs, they don't really they don't reach most of the students. Now, how does program assessment and evaluation, having that transparency, help students? It helps clarify what their faculty have identified as the competencies that are critical for their discipline. So a lot of times when we interview students and do qualitative research on student perspectives and on how they feel about their programs and things like that, what we have found is that students always say they don't see the connection. They don't see the connection or the reason why they're taking different courses. They don't see the interconnection. They kind of see it on a siloed approach. What do I need to do to fulfill the requirements for course A, course B, course C this semester? And then that's how they see it. Whereas learning outcomes can theoretically provide students that framework that will allow them to see what are the main competencies to identify graduates in these programs and how are they being assessed. So yeah, definitely transparency is great. And Joan Martin is here somewhere.
We have another point pop up.
She has mapped all of the learning outcomes to specific courses and identifies how they map within the syllabi of each of these courses. So it's very transparent for students in the dietetics program.
I'm just doing my job. It's tedious, but I get it done.
Yeah, do you want to
Definitely
explain a little bit more about how you do that, Joan? You have a very
Well,
comprehensive process.
Luckily, I'm guided by our accreditation body. You know, they give us 30, 35 standards to go by, and we sit down with the faculty and we go through which course would best assess certain standards that we have. And so we do introduce it places and reinforce it places and then assess it places. But we're big on rubrics, but it doesn't hurt to learn some new tricks of the trade.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome.
And another question we have is, do you encourage including a narrative section as part of a rubric evaluation, something that allows for a more subjective assessment beyond the checkbox matrix internal part of the rubric?
Yes, as you saw previously in our presentation, the value rubrics have such a descriptor, and that's what makes it really robust and usable for multiple people. Defining what you mean by the competencies that you're including in the rubric is essential, and especially if they relate to, well, these rubrics should relate to a larger learning outcome or larger set of learning outcomes, defining how the competencies defined in the rubric in the different roles, if it's an analytic rubric, kind of map up to a bigger learning outcome that provides students that context. And like I was saying before, it provides them with a roadmap of why they're learning what they're learning and how it relates to the assignments that they're doing, and how you are looking at those assignments in context of the learning outcomes to be able to help them master or demonstrate an appropriate level of mastery for that learning outcome, and then for the subset of competencies are defined in the rubric. Okay. So you all can keep on typing questions away in the muddiest point poll while we continue on with the rest of the presentation. The next piece is about rubric data analysis. And in this section, we'll talk about how to analyze all the data you gather with these rubrics, right? So rubrics are great because they can provide rich data, especially if you're looking at subscores within a rubric that's divided into multiple competencies, like you saw in the analytic rubric. But even holistic rubrics can provide useful information about how well students are performing and define specifically what areas can be used, what areas students may need improvements on. So there's multiple ways to collect the data. And sometimes that's the biggest challenge, especially if you're collaborating with other faculty members or other people in terms of gathering these data. So Canvas is a great tool if you have the assessments online, and the competencies can be put into a rubric within the Canvas environment. And instructional designers can help design that. If you need any, if you have any questions that are not answered by the instructional designers, you could always ask us as well. The indicators or the criterion that we use within the rubrics can be assessed in using Speedgrader. So there's two options to grade using a rubric. You could either give an overall grade, or you can use Speedgrader, which allows you to see the student assignment on one side and then the rubric on the other side. And it allows you to go into each of the different competencies identified in your rubric and actually provide an individual score for each of them. We've tried to extract this, but it's impossible as a data set. The only data that they provide is the overall score, even if you already entered a subscore for each of the different competencies within your rubric. Now, the way we have used this in the past has been to manually transfer these into an Excel file, and for each student, go through each student and then collect that data manually. Now, this can be tedious if you're dealing with a lot of students. So that might not be a really handy solution. We have been working with the FIU Online people to try to see if there's any alternatives for that. And we will update you all if we get any more information on this. Excel has also been used a lot, and we have a template that will calculate automatically scores for rubrics that are entered into this Excel sheet. So for a lot of faculty and for a lot of people, they use rubrics in a outside of Canvas environment, or even if you have the inside Canvas, you can use the Speedgrader to populate this Excel sheet. You can contact us, and I think Susie is going to show you what this
I'll try.
template looks like.
I'll try. So, you can have the, the competencies up here. And then if you have 2 raters, 3 raters, however many, average those scores, and then you can get, it can calculate based off of the tables that you have, how many students were in your sample, how many met what was the class average across the whole rubric, what was the number that met the minimum criteria for success as defined in your method section, if you're using this for SACS reporting, and then the average per criteria, per the competency areas that you're measuring. So we can make that for you if you need it, or I can provide the template for you. Just let us know.
Yeah, so like Susie was saying, if you do want a copy of this or to customize this, you could always set up a mini consultation meeting with us or send us a very detailed email. But sometimes it helps to talk it out so that we know exactly what
Do like a consultation.
So it doesn't take long, less than half an hour, and we will be able to develop a template that will work for you. And that way it could fit your needs and the needs of your department if multiple faculty members are going to be using it. I see here that we have a comment from Rachel. We assess student oral communication skills via recording of student presentations, and we deal with a lot of students. We've tried having students put videos on YouTube, recording them on Zoom or via cell phone during class meeting time, and to upload MP4 files on Canvas. Has anyone found a good way to do this? Because each way we have tried has failed. Any faculty first have any feedback on that for Rachel? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So interrupt
We'll
me
think on that.
if you let me know, if you want to let me know, but
How do others assess communication skills?
so what we've seen, and this is based on the reading of, oh, wait, hold on, Tamara, you want to answer it?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Yes. So it depends on what you are evaluating while you are recording the students. What's your goal in recording them? So if it's to assess certain skills, for example, I'm teaching a health assessment course right now. And in my health assessment course, they have to record themselves because it's FIU online. They have to record themselves assessing a patient. So in that particular rubric, what are the skills that I'm going to evaluate while I'm watching them in that, piece of video that they're going to place in their assignment? So for each skill, how am I expecting them to perform that particular skill? So on that rubric, I put the details of what I'm looking for. So if they say they assess the heart, did they look at each part of the heart that they need to look at? So on the rubric, these will be detailed and be given a score in order for them to be evaluated properly. So each student will come out with these exact skills that they'll show in that particular video. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I'm thinking. Could be the same type of, assessment for whatever assignment that you have.
How do you collect the videos, Tamara?
So the students upload the video and embed it into the assignment results of the Canvas. It's on Canvas, actually.
Okay.
So there is a space for them to drop it, like a Dropbox, and I go back and watch their videos. I also have them in another assignment place their video in a discussion box, and that populates on Canvas. So all the students are able to see each other and see, introduce each other or see their introduction to each other. I'm sorry. It's after lunch.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for offering those suggestions. Rachel, do you have something to ask?
Yeah, we have a really nice rubric
Mhm.
that we got from the website you showed earlier. The problem we're struggling with is the logistics of actually getting the videos, because we do iterator reliability. We want to have 2 people rate each video. We don't have the instructor rate the video, although I can see why that would be very helpful and cut back on some time for us. But it's retrieving this past accreditation time, we rated about 200 videos, and it's challenging to find a place to like put them and organize them. So I'm just curious about the logistics of getting the actual videos, because we've tried downloading them all from Canvas, having students submit them to Canvas as MP4 files, and downloading them, but it's just 8 hours to download and trying to get access from each of the instructors, because we assess 5 different classes. So getting instructors who are already teaching 5 classes and they're crazy busy and stressed out during final exam week to download those files for us and upload them again to a OneDrive for the raters to turn around and download onto their computer so they can watch it, it's very clunky.
Yeah, so what we use a lot, and we deal with not necessarily for presentations, but we do deal with sharing large files amongst people. We have a SharePoint site set up, and with the SharePoint site, you can create what they call lists, and those can be items that you can have people drop in. So if you want help with that, we can definitely give you some ideas on that, and maybe we can set up a meeting regarding that, because we do use different kinds of tools here to share the massive files that we work with. Amongst
Thank you. I'll send you an email right now.
Okay, fantastic. That will be great. We can definitely, and especially for your different scenarios, I think that giving suggestions for random solutions is harder if we're not like working with the actual files and working with the actual faculty members that are going to be using this new system, because we can definitely give a lot of suggestions for drop boxes or things like that, or other kinds of resources, but without knowing the exact way that you all work, that we want to integrate whatever solutions we have to how you're already doing things, rather than give you something new, so that it'll be easier to adopt by the faculty. And it'll be more useful as well if it's more closely aligned to what you need. Okay, any other questions before I move on to the next piece? Okay. I'm not seeing any raised hands, so I'm going to go on. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. So developing and using the criteria for success. So for this component, the analysis of the data that you look at will be driven by what expectations you have on the level of mastery students should demonstrate. If you have a 4-point scale, for example, and you feel that students should at least score 3 in order to develop mastery, then that should be defined at the very beginning when you're developing that rubric. And the reason why this is important is because when you're analyzing the data, you have 2 ways of analyzing it. You have averages, which is simply averaging all of the students within a group, within the sample. and being able to see how well they performed overall. And there is the way of seeing whether all of your students met the minimum criteria. And if you set your minimum criteria as a 3 and only 50% of your students scored a 3 or above, then it's something that might need more attention. And it might give you another kind of way of understanding your data, because averages can be somewhat deceptive depending on how many people you have and the statistics behind that, you know, how those numbers might affect your averages. You might have just a lot of high scores or scores that are doing really well and might kind of make your distribution a little bit wonky, but if you have that minimum criteria, you'll be able to understand how many students meet that minimum expectation. It'll give you a different perspective. Going back a little bit to the previous slide, that, you know, what I was talking about really was number 3, which is having the different descriptive statistics associated with your data can also help. So not only just the mean, which is the most common, but the mean, median, and the mode can also provide some additional information about how your distribution is and how your students are scoring in these rubrics. And then for calculating these, we can adapt the Excel sheet that Susie showed to having medians and modes as well, so that if you're interested in having those beyond the mean, we can add it to that. Okay, next, Susie. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 ways of showing your data, and this is related to what I was talking about before. So here we have a per competency view on how many students scored at each level. So when you look at your writing outcome, for example, the first competency within writing, appropriate use of sources, 10 students, in other words, 20% of your class, scored below expectation, 5 students approaching expectation, and 25 meeting expectation. As you can see, about 50% of your students are at that category. That's the majority of your students. And then, you know, but a higher percentage of your students are below expectation in appropriate use of sources than in your other categories. So the area that they're doing worst in is in that one category. Now, seeing the data like this allows you to see the distribution better, because if you go to the next example, you only see that last number here. So you see how many of them meet the expectations that you had, but that only that doesn't let you see the other levels of the rubric and how students performed in these other areas. So this view of the data is important because you're able to determine whether or not your students did reach the minimum expectations you had set. But the other view allows you to see a more disaggregated, more detailed view of how they performed according to the distribution of the rubric that you have. Any questions on this before I move on? Or any questions on how to analyze the data that you collect or how to use it? Okay. So here are some examples of different scenarios, and the different scenarios are based on different criteria for success that have been defined. As I said before, the minimum criteria for success is the minimum level of mastery that you expect students to perform according to the rubric that you have. And each of these scenarios talks about what the calculation entails and a sample result or a sample summary of the data that you have analyzed. So I'm not going to go through each of these examples unless you want me to. But for the sake of time, because we're coming close to the 3:30 mark, and I wanted questions at the end, I will go through just the first example. The first example says the class average of 4 points or above per competency in a 5-point scale. So what that means is you're going to calculate competency by doing a simple mean across all students. And in this case, you have an analytical rubric with 2 competencies, and the 3.5 is for the first competency, the analysis criterion, and then the second one is the 4.2 for the content criterion. And then you have your number of students in the sample, and you are able to see what the number of students is. What I realized that we need to see is that we need to see how many of them, okay, that's not great. Sorry about that interruption. So as you can see here, the minimum criteria said that you don't have, you want a 4-point average. And for the analysis criteria, you got a 3.5, which means that this is the area for improving. And that's how you use the results in your rubric scores. So you see your target, you see your results, and then you see which areas need to be most improved. And that's what you're going to target for changing the assignments, changing the way that you're teaching, or any resources that might be related to that competency in particular. Any questions on this? Okay. So interpreting data from analytic rubrics and holistic rubrics, the difference really is the breakdown and the ability for you to analyze the more detailed breakdown of the competencies within an analytical rubric that will provide the information that they might benefit you more for being able to develop more targeted improvement strategies. The holistic rubrics are still helpful, but they provide more summary information about how students are performing overall. Like I said before, holistic rubrics can be used, but it might be that they might be more helpful for assignments that have less details or less, they're faster to complete and faster to assess than maybe assignments that you want more detail on, like that might be more geared towards an analytic rubric, which has multiple competencies defined. I see there's another question. Tamara, are you using this type of calculating rubric scores for the end of the course or the end of the program learning outcomes in the situation of accreditation purposes? For everything. We can use these rubrics to calculate both what you report for SACs or for the end of the year for your program that you report to our team within the assessment reports you provide, and also for individual courses or any assignments that you might be using rubrics for. And that sheet that Susie showed before can serve both purposes as well. So if you want to have a rubric template for your course in which you're using rubrics, and it might not be part of the assessment report that you submit every year, then you can have our team help you as well for developing that for your assignments. But they are helpful for the student level, student learning outcome level assessments that you provide for us as well. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So moving on, is there any questions about how different it is interpreting data from the two different types of rubrics? Again, the key characteristic of the analytic rubrics is that breakdown by competency. That's the main difference of why it's different from the holistic rubrics that just has a series of things that need to be mastered for each of the performance scale indicators. Okay, next. Okay, so key takeaways real fast, because I want to take questions at the end. Choose the right tool to go with the desired outcome. Again, if you just need a quick rubric, maybe a holistic might be best suited. If you want a detailed project or something that requires different competencies, an analytic rubric might be the best. Analytic rubrics provide the most detail, and it helps you make more targeted improvement actions. And really, it comes to planning well how you're going to collect the data for these rubrics and how to best analyze the data and how to use the data that comes out from the analysis, which is, rubrics are geared for improvement, and that's why we advocate the use for them, because it's not only geared for improvement for for ourselves and for faculty who are using these tools to assess things, but it's also a way for students and for people being assessed to improve upon their own performances even before they do the performance. So if they get these rubrics before the assignments are due, then they're able to understand the expectations well and use it as a tool to evaluate their own work, and maybe even as a peer review tool for assessing the work of their peers within their classrooms or other environments that they're using these tools for. Any questions? Okay. So if you do have any other questions, and if you have any more feedback, or if you want help from our team in developing a rubric, in developing a tool or a template to assess or calculate the means and averages for your rubrics, then please reach out to us. We're here for you. We also have a lot of resources in our website, assessment.fiu.edu. And these include examples of the rubrics that we have collected over time. And we'll be updating that listing soon. William's working on that project right now, and he's collecting rubrics from other institutions. So if you go to our website and you go to resources.
Putting in the chat, hold on.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Susie.
Resources. We've got rubrics and curriculum, slow internet. Rubrics and curriculum maps, all over here. All the value rubrics are here that we talked about, and then specialized rubrics.
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of resources outside of our website too. We have books and other internet tools and things like that we can provide to you. We can do consultations and just help tailor rubrics to fit your needs, whether it is, and we get this question asked a lot. Do we only help for the assessment that is for SACs or for the AOC requirements from the Board of Governors? And no, the answer is any assessments that you do for any of your courses, we will help you with. Again, our team our purpose and the reason why we continue working on this is not because of accountability. None of us are fond of that. We are here to help, and we are all ultimately here to help students succeed and to help our faculty succeed in teaching our students. And so we really take the service component of our work as our primary source of reward, and also the reason why we do our jobs. So please let us know if we can help you in any way, because helping you will help our FIU and our students. So that's why we're here. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been a pleasure. We'll provide an email with all the links to the website and then to the video and also to the PowerPoint presentations that we have.
Yeah. The PowerPoint should be posted on YouTube later this week. Or not the PowerPoint, the video, the recording. All
Thank you, everyone.
right, thank you, everybody. Have a
Bye.
great day. Bye.